Hello and welcome. I'm George Eliason. I'm the investigative journalist that has been breaking stories about the information war in Ukraine for the past 7 years. If you want to know who's behind the run-up to war in Ukraine, you're in the right place. Stay tuned. Welcome back. We're going to do this through first-person accounts. From here, we're going for a ride. So who exactly is behind the media blitz sparking all of this? Information Operations Group, SEL, have been working in Ukraine since the Orange Revolution. And now, with Joe Biden in office, they've gone back to work supporting their client's agenda for Russia and Ukraine.
SCL executive manager Mark Turnbull bragged about a job subcontracted to another company in an unidentified Eastern European nation. He thought no one seemed to know they were there.
They ghosted in, did the work, ghosted out, and produced really good material. So we have experience doing this.
What would we do? Disrupt, deny, degrade, deceive, corrupt, usurp, or destroy the information. The information, please don't forget, is the ultimate objective of cyber. That will directly impact the decision-making process of the adversary's leader, who is the ultimate target.
The purpose of influence operations is not to provide a perspective, opinion, or lay out a policy. It is defined as the ability to make audiences think and act in a manner favorable to the mission objectives. This is done through applying perception management techniques which target the audience's emotions, motives, and reasoning. These techniques are not geared for debate. It is to overwhelm and change the target psyche. Using these techniques, information sources can be manipulated, and those that write, speak, or think counter to the objective are relegated as propaganda, ill-informed, or irrelevant.
The word propaganda is frequently used to describe any news emerging from one's opponent. Used this way, it's only natural that all the news coming from our side is labeled the truth regardless of what that news actually is.
Second, and just as important, is who is our side. In American democracy, is there a room left for dissenting opinions? Should the government be taken to task for mistakes and mismanagement due to policy moves? Russian websites outright accusing the U.S. of supplying ammunition and other support to the rebels. I asked a friend in a position within the U.S. that might know more about this. He claims it is a private initiative of U.S. citizens. Now I have a thought bouncing around inside my head which actually makes sense. But the repercussions are wild, off the charts bloody, and may destroy a nation. If one looks at that graphic, natural gas pipelines run through Ukraine. If one had the talent, one could close valves in any of those pipelines and shut down a major part of Russia's exports and, therefore, a source of money, another kind of power which Putin must truly understand.
Bumping this up one step, blow up those pipelines, although that is going to make one hell of a mess.
This would result in a Russian invasion. End of story? No. Imagine trying to defend thousands of miles of pipeline. Ukrainian insurgents would make Russia devote dozens of divisions of soldiers. Suddenly I have 510 people in Ukraine following this blog.
Images of the burning embers at the crash site recall the shocking moment the Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 was shot down.
The information war for Ukraine has taken on a whole new look. Russia, you need to go down. You need to choke on your ilk. You need to feel the pain of exceeding the limits of acceptability. You need to pay.
TAA is the only methodology of its type and has been verified and validated by the U.S. Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, DARPA, the Sandia National Laboratories, USA, and the UK's Defence Science and Technology Laboratories, DSTL.
The MH17 shootdown activated the next piece of the SCL information operation. Independent researchers were needed to push the Russian invasion narrative into media and into the world's psyche. Elliot Higgins went to work with SCL's Ukrainian information operation operatives, who in 2015 will become an intrinsic part of the DNC hack, the entire Russia-Trump collusion narrative, the Steele dossier, and Manafort's Party of Regions Black Book. It was SCL's Ukraine's informed napalm team member, Anton Pavlushko, that began development of Bellingcat's information narrative. They put Russia on trial with evidence that seems to be faked Facebook posts from Ukrainian and British information operatives. Over the intervening years, it became clear Bellingcat was working under SCL's Ukraine team, headed by Dmytro Zolotukhin. SCL's Ukraine's Ministry of Information Policy oversaw FBI trainer Aaron Wiesberg and Bellingcat's work, helping to develop Miratovets, which is Ukraine's hit-for-hire web portal. At the same time, SCL's Bellingcat denies involvement with Joe Harding's Ukraine IO unit, who are working with the Atlantic Council. Eric Toller is doing seminars with the Ministry of Information Policy to add members to their ranks. Higgins' response to all this when I confronted him: no one will care.
I still engage with pro-Russian trolls on a daily basis. I've had reporters write bad stories about me on Russian news sites. I currently have a vehemently rabid anti-Western, especially anti-American troll trying to smear a group of Russian troll chasers I work with. He also publishes stories blaming us for all his woes. The difference is I have been professionally trained on how to mess up somebody's life, permanently and forever. Yeah, we were trained in special forces more on weapons, operations, tactics, and medicine. But being trained in unconventional warfare does give one an advantage. Ukraine is a bright, shining star. They approved a Minister of Information policy. They received a national information strategy and are working on a counter-propaganda center. Wonderful news out of Ukraine. I submitted some papers to this end. I personally believe a few of my words survived. I know others involved in other parts of this effort. Minister of Information Policy Yuri Stets has 5 missions. This effort is geared to contain what they call Russian propaganda in the West. In late January, Ukraine's Minister of Information Policy, Yuri Stets, promised to create an information army to fight Russian propaganda. And there are many kinds of propaganda. Let me focus on what we are mostly seeing being dumped on us by Russia. I'll put them in a spreadsheet and send it to anyone wanting to help. Together we'll see if we can send that to enough people to make a case against him, embarrass him and make it impossible for his to show his face without being labeled a bad journalist, a liar, guilty of perjury, and a dirty propagandist. Photographs can be photoshopped, so can videos. Eyewitness accounts are suspect. Reporter stories are only as reliable as the news sources, and that means they are not reliable. Even if the most reliable person in the world says something, their word can always be branded speculation.
As the work progressed in 2015, they started targeting journalists and media platforms who spoke badly about then-candidate Hillary Clinton, who they were supporting. This would lead to the creation of ProperNut by the Atlantic Council for the Ministry of Information Policy, Harding founded in Ukraine.
But I was having problems describing a whole-of-government approach, and I was having even more difficulty explaining how a whole-of-nation effort might be divided. We finally came up with 5 categories for what I might call government corporate private information activities. I am also not certain how to include discussions on content, such as a narrative. Cultural, religious, and historical considerations also may be discussed. Where would they fit in? I also can't forget the methodology of efficiency. How do we determine methods of effectiveness? Once again, the voice of my friend and mentor Dr. Dorothy Denning reminds me of this important consideration. If I take a whole-of-nation approach, then I should include marketing, public relations, perception management, reputation management, and strategic communications, with a small s. What have I missed?
Disinformation charter for media and bloggers. Top-down censorship should be avoided. But rival media, from Al Jazeera to the BBC, Fox and beyond, need to get together to create a charter of acceptable and unacceptable behavior. Vigorous debate and disagreement is of course to be encouraged, but media organizations that practice conscious deception should be excluded from the community. A similar code can be accepted by bloggers and other online influencers.
As you can clearly see, Harding and Wiesberg are the originators of the Propernaut list. Propernaut is an Atlantic Council production under Michael Weiss.
These countries account for 81% of all the Kremlin trolls and their engaged followers. The top 5 countries alone account for 58%. That the USA is ranked first came as something of a surprise. Detailed analysis is ongoing, and I'm unlikely to share the findings publicly. I'm glad it works for you. My initial reaction to Propernaut taking the graph and making it a list was allergic. Toxic even. But it holds up. It can be and has been reproduced. In killing him, and make no mistake about it, Putin killed him. Putin has taken on, in addition to the entire world, the Ukrainian-American diaspora. He probably thinks it's a joke. Their intellectual, material, and political resources are far greater than Putin can imagine. Be forewarned, Vlad. Diasporas have long memories, and this one will give you and your apologists in Russia and the West no rest.
If you're wondering who was paying for the media censorship in the US and worldwide, with all these fact checkers and with it and the censors themselves pushing deplatforming and actually staffing it, well, now you know.
Journalists that need to be excluded are those are side labeled as propagandists or active measure agents. What does it mean to be irrelevant? The following exchange was given at the Heritage Foundation in June 2014. The opinions of over 1 billion peaceful Muslims are deemed irrelevant. Opinions of over 8 million Muslim Americans are irrelevant because they also don't support the agenda to change regimes in countries like Libya, Syria, Egypt, or Yemen. George, you know my background. I will find you.
They started labeling everything against the information operation as fake news. They developed fact checkers. StopFake was the first. They became Google's fact checkers. They started deplatforming companies in social media. Adam Hunt is part of the engine that makes the best-known One Bot Sentinel work. They deplatformed and demonetized you.
Imagine being so degenerate. You destroy the foundational freedoms from your own people. You destroy livelihoods and reputations of not just good people, good journalists, professionals, and it cuts across a lot of professions these days. And you do this for money. For a foreign country. Ukraine is a foreign country. You light the world on fire, taking it to the brink of war for diaspora nationalists in Canada and the US, and feel so protected you can be this brazen. And you do all this just because you can.
Hey, how are you doing? Guess what? For the first time ever I'm being paid to do IW. I did IO for years. Ran the IO Institute and was paid for that. I ran my old Inform is to Influence blog for 9 years and wasn't paid a penny. I started a week ago. Just an FYI, I did write a national information strategy for Ukraine, but they never adapted. I've been a writer too published by RAN, and I never controlled or even suggested to a single troll. I've consulted and advised a lot, but DoD and Congress are cheap, except when passing large bills.
Oh, and I've worked in cooperation with, not for, the US government, in quite a few foreign countries. Where are you now?
Let's take a moment for a public service announcement. Now, you're probably familiar with the anti-vaccine mandate rally in Washington recently. The rally wasn't against people getting vaccinations. It was so, remember, we remember to take care of a group becoming known as the vaccine injured. One story in particular I'm going to expand on at a later date is Maddie DeGarry's. This young girl volunteered for Pfizer's vaccine trials because she wanted to do her part and help. Maddie had a very bad reaction to the vaccine and will need medical care for the rest of her life. Pfizer and the federal government have both washed their hands of her situation. Maddie went to bat for humanity. Americans need to go to bat for Maddie.
24 hours after Maddie got her second Pfizer shot during trial, she was in the ER. Today, she can't walk. Instead of telling the truth, Pfizer reported her sudden illness as generalized neuralgia and functional abdominal pain. They buried her injury. Does functional abdominal pain properly explain a child in a wheelchair with a feeding tube? Of course not. And when her parents notified the FDA, nothing, not even a callback.
Paid for by the Vaccine Safety Research Foundation.
Following Joe Biden's inauguration, Ukraine began complaining of a Russian troop buildup on its border. They claimed Russia moved over 90,000 men. According to Ukraine's Zelensky, Russia was prepared to attack at any moment.
In April, Russia began one of its frequent military readiness checks. Although there were reported 10,000 soldiers including airborne and amphibious troops in Crimea, the bulk of the military force was located at Kasputin Yar. Kasputin Yar is 751 kilometers or 466 miles away from the Ukrainian border. This would take an average modern army 3.5 days to mobilize and be ready to fight. You have to account for refueling as well as moving heavy weapons. They have to set up staging areas, then build bases. Voronezh is 515 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. This is 320 miles or 2 days to mobilize and prepare for action. Neither base could be used for a surprise attack. In response to the imaginary Russian buildup on its border, Ukraine mobilized over half its army or over 170,000 troops to the front line with all the heavy weapons at its disposal accompanying them. This force was a supposed counter to the Russian invasion, which Ukraine claimed was just over the border. Recently, Ukraine's President Zelensky told the Ukrainian Foreign Intelligence Service,
We have learned to contain external threats. It is time to launch an offensive to secure our national interests. We are united in wanting our territory returned immediately.
Ukraine began a series of escalations throughout the spring, shelling civilian areas. All throughout April and into the summer, President Zelensky demanded American servicemen be sent to fight and maybe die for his Ukraine. Although Biden refused to send Americans to fight, this is the story President Biden, members of Congress, and mainstream media have been echoing. Russia had one demand: that the West hold Ukraine's feet to the fire and fulfill the 2015 Minsk agreement. So what is it that Ukraine's President Zelensky finds so threatening about Russia? Ukrainian President Zelensky told visiting U.S. senators in early June 2021 that the Ukraine's military defense against Russia and the completion of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline are inextricably intertwined. Once the project is completed, Ukraine will be deprived of the funds required to fund defense spending and defend Europe's eastern border. According to Zelensky,
Nord Stream 2 will cut Ukraine off from gas supplies, which will cost us at least $3 billion per year. We won't be able to pay for the Ukrainian army.
Zelensky, always the joker, wants Russia to pay $3 billion per year so he personally can defend Europe from Russia, who is paying him. What a great story. Seeing he's confusing screenwriting fantasy with diplomacy again. Ukraine demanded American and European soldiers back up Ukraine so it could launch an attack on Russia. To which, Joe Brandon said no. In fact,
It was such a great story. Biden's Ukraine did a sequel in the fall of 2021. First, Ukraine tried to pull Europe and NATO into a conflict with Russia by claiming Russia was back on the border. This time the Russian army was closer than ever. So where is Joe Biden, the EU, and NATO getting their intelligence about the Russian army from? As you can see, from Maidan until now, US analysts are on vacation when it comes to Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. But does Joe Biden have access to satellite imagery about where the Russian army is positioned? The answer is yes. In the fall of 2021, the Russian army staged planned war games near the city of Yelnya. This city is 257 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. You heard that right. The Russian army was 160 miles away from the Ukrainian border. Even though every major Western publication made it sound like they were already in Kiev, it would take days to mobilize. For the average modern army, that means over a day's travel just to get to the Ukrainian border. Then another 4 to 5 hours travel on top of that to where the Ukrainian army is. It's not much of a surprise attack.
After Russian troops took part in month-long drills in several regions near Ukraine, more than 10,000 soldiers are returning to their permanent bases. That's according to Interfax news agency on Saturday, citing the Russian military, which described the drills as a stage of combat coordination now completed. Russia's deployment of tens of thousands of troops to the north, east, and south of Ukraine had fueled fears in Kiev and the West that Moscow was planning an attack.
Now, NATO allies have put forces on standby and sent ships and fighter jets to bolster Europe's eastern defenses. And the European Union says it is ready to impose never-seen-before economic sanctions if Russia invades.
Now that you know who's behind the build-up to war in Ukraine, if you look back, the timing of the escalation and Harding's return to work coincide. What really sticks out is the fact that media has been leading political decisions and not the other way around. This is InfoWar. In the event of war, Ukraine in reality has about 1 month's worth of diesel if Kiev ignores Ukraine's responsibility to its own people, providing a safety net, or at least access to necessities like bread and shelter by subsidizing gas and electric costs. But, unfortunately, the only thing the government in Kiev is concerned about is losing $3 billion a year in transit fees from the country they accuse of attacking them. Zelensky's government went as far as demanding fees from Germany and Russia when Nord Stream 2 was ready to take over the transit game. Zelensky's Ukraine has been shuffling Europe, NATO, and the US closer and closer to the line where one mistake in diplomacy, one stupid move by any of Ukraine's infamous Neanderthal nationalist volunteers, and bang! The next headline reads, "Oops, thousands dead in Ukraine as the war spreads across Europe." But how does this affect Ukraine? How does this affect you? I'll be covering Ukraine's policy toward Donbass at a later time. Joe Biden does not like Ukraine's President Zelensky. Ukraine's President Zelensky does not like Joe Biden. So the US President wants to reinstall his comrade in corruption, Petro Poroshenko. Joe Biden and Club Rhino are sleepwalking America right into this level of catastrophe by coddling his pet kleptocracy, who's already stolen billions of US dollars meant as aid. And why? Well, why, oh why indeed. Ukraine is using the supposed Russian attack to renegotiate its unsolvable gas problem. Well, what about Russia? Russia won't invade Ukraine because then Russia will be responsible for providing a total civil safety net including gas and electricity, for Ukrainian people who otherwise can't afford it. Ukraine's economy is dying, and Russia doesn't want to foot the bill. But, unfortunately, the only thing the government in Kiev is concerned about is losing $3 billion a year in transit fees from the country they accuse of attacking them. Zelensky's government went as far as demanding fees from Germany and Russia when Nord Stream 2 was ready to take over the transit game. The only way Biden's Ukraine can become energy independent is if fuel prices perpetually soar from now on. Ukraine will be able to pay financial obligations like the World Bank and investors like Hunter Biden. This cost gets absorbed by you every time you go to the gas pump, and you're about to find out why. Timoshenko said that Ukraine shouldn't wait to purchase Russian gas supplies until the end of the heating season, because there's nowhere else to get it. Now here's the kicker. For Ukrainian citizens to be able to afford gas, to be able to run business, to be able to run agriculture, they're going to have to sell their own expensive gas and try to make a deal with Russia anyway to buy the cheaper gas that Russia sells. In all of this, the big victory for Joe Biden is he will have successfully weaned the EU and US off Russian hydrocarbon products. Now this will be done at the expense of destroyed economies and societies like we're witnessing now in the US. If energy costs are through the roof, Joe Biden has made a clear runway to dismantle the US economy, and Democrats will do what Democrats are doing. Just how desperate is the Ukrainian situation right now?
Ukrainian gas firms promise to reinvest revenues in increased production and modernization, but in the meantime, other industries and small businesses are relocating across the world. Instead of reinvesting in production, profits are being sucked out of companies by investors. The Ukrainian Association of Gas Production Companies vehemently rejected proposals to impose state regulation of Ukrainian gas pricing in October, citing the fact that it would inflict a blow on Ukraine's image in the world arena and severely harm the European Union integration processes. Only those Ukrainian oligarchs' companies like those of Rinat Akhmedov, Igor Kolomoisky, and Viktor Pinchuk, who control gas production companies and can send natural gas to their enterprises, are affected in this situation. If Ukraine could produce enough gas tomorrow, its citizens can't afford high-priced Ukrainian gas and hydrocarbon products. The reserves are 5,000 feet below the surface and the costs of drilling and extraction are quite high. According to Oleg Popinko, the head of the Union of Consumers of Utilities, high gas costs will prevent most small and medium-sized firms from operating and will force them to close.
Small business owners will be unable to pull the payment of 7,000 hryvnias, or 22,000 rubles for heating. As a result, we can anticipate a reduction in the activities of hairdressing salons, bakers, dry cleaners, dental offices, and so on. They will either have to include the higher-priced energy cost in the pricing of their services, or they will have to close. All types of businesses, from small dry cleaners to big agricultural holdings, use gas to some extent. The only ones who benefit from the price increase are Ukrainian gas-producing businesses, which are now raising the price for their users dozens of times, resulting in massive profits.
Just how desperate is the Ukrainian situation right now? In a recent interview, President Zelensky's former office head Andrei Bogdan forecast a total economic collapse by February of 2022.
Here we still have December. This is the pre-New Year's festive month when everyone spends money, and somehow have hope. We, here, will pull something out of the egg box and live. But in January, February this will not happen. We will fire people. Our industry will develop costs. Our budget revenues will decrease. Our economy will massively change based on the price of gas and energy.
With a further rise in gas prices, the chemical industry and the production of fertilizers are at risk of dying altogether. Industry will die. I'm not kidding. The impact of energy prices on the business situation is an inertial process. The business will not close immediately, it will happen in stages. The beginning will be in March 2022, we'll see the peak by May-June. This is happening with a favorable market environment. Mineral fertilizers are in demand, they are actively purchased by India, Pakistan, and China. But Ukrainian enterprises cannot afford to produce them. This was confirmed by the recent suspension of this kind of specialized work at the Odessa port plant. Thus, Ukrainian exporters are squeezed out of world markets. Many of Ukraine's neighbors produce similar products like nitrogen fertilizers receive gas at fixed low prices. In Turkey, for example, the government regulates gas prices for such businesses. It will also be difficult to sell the products that have risen in price on the domestic market due to falling purchasing power.
An increase in fertilizer prices will lead to abandoning the farming of many crops and an increase in the price of agricultural products, especially wheat in the 2022 to 2023 season. The cost of gas is largely carried over to the cost of wheat and other crops. If gas prices remain high for a long time, the rise in gas prices can make a significant contribution to the price of wheat. Farmers still need to dry the harvested wheat crop, which also implies significant gas consumption. The next in the cycle of its processing are millers and bakers, who are also going bankrupt due to high gas prices.
What all this adds up to is the breadbasket of Europe is empty. Ukraine hasn't seen this kind of scarcity since the 32-33 famine they're constantly enshrining. The difference between then and now is this time the Ukrainian government is responsible for all of it. Bakeries will close down because Ukraine oversold wheat to Turkey and its stocks are empty. Now the breadbasket nation needs to purchase flour from Turkey. Even if the grain was there, the gas needed to furnish the bakeries, the cities, businesses, homes, hospitals, and the government buildings with heat and electricity is not. This is part of the reason why Joe Biden is trying to push Ukraine into war.
I came to a bakery in the Kiev region. A modern enterprise. The bakery today pays for gas 7 times more than a year ago. And for electricity twice, and energy carriers play a very significant role in the cost of bread, about 20%. That is, in reality, already today they are forced to either increase the cost of bread, or there will be no bread.
The only way Biden's Ukraine can become energy independent is if fuel prices perpetually soar from now on. Ukraine will be able to pay financial obligations like World Bank loans and investors like Hunter Biden. This cost gets absorbed by you every time you go to the gas pump. The short-term gas forecast for Ukraine looks bleak, even though Ukraine has the second largest proven gas reserves in Europe, right behind Russia. Former Ukrainian Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko.
To increase gas production in Ukraine, first of all, the will of the president is needed, because this should become a strategic and most important program for the development of the state's energy sector. There is no such political will today. Licenses are distributed right and left. Ukraine could provide itself with gas in 3 years, but under certain conditions. Ukraine should not wait for Russian gas supplies until the end of the heating season, but there is nowhere else to get it.
Why are you paying so much at the pump for consumer goods, for natural gas or oil and oil products? And what does that have to do with Ukraine? Nord Stream 2 is the fulcrum all of this is balanced on. Without it, Russia takes its gas east instead of west, and it effectively shutters Ukrainian gas transit revenues. But it's only now that we get to the part that'll make Americans and Europeans equally appalled. High oil and gas production costs means unprofitable European and Caspian Sea oil and gas fields are all of a sudden profitable, and there's a captive market if there's no low-cost alternatives left. At the same time, the most recent data from the U.S. Energy Information Administration shows that in May 2021, the U.S. imported 844,000 barrels per day of crude oil and petroleum products from Russia. That's almost 10% of all the U.S. imports for that month. Historically speaking, this is setting a new monthly record for oil imports from Russia. A large reason for the spike in Russian imports is believed to be sanctions the U.S. placed on Venezuela in 2019. Some of the U.S. plants have specialized systems to refine these fuels, and some oil companies have turned to Russia to keep those factories going in the absence of Venezuelan imports. As for the Keystone XL pipeline Joe Biden canceled, it would have been able to carry up to 830,000 barrels per day. Now, this doesn't count the additional cheap U.S. oil and gas production the Biden administration effectively cut off after taking office. The more oil and gas products costs spike across the world, the less dependent the EU and Ukraine are on Russian gas. The reason for this is because they've set up a situation where these gas spikes are across the world. Ukraine's fracking fields will be profitable again at high prices. And right now, while they're getting ready for an invasion, they're setting up to frack in the Donetsk Basin. The more profitable the expensive EU oil and gas production rigs become, the more diverse gas production purchases are. Short-term energy diversification and security is achieved through extremely high-price energy products. This brings many of the older, more costly rigs in the North Sea, Azerbaijan, and the Caspian Sea out of mothballs and into service. BP was committed to shuttering its North Sea drill rig fleet by 2050, and now has a reason to bring them back online again. It also has a reason to explore more expensive to produce Ukraine and Caspian Sea fields that it previously walked away from because they were unprofitable in a cheap oil and gas market. The big price surge started in Europe because of the Nord Stream situation, and buyers underbought because of the COVID situation. They weren't expecting people to be going back to work. Now, Russia fulfilled its obligations in terms of delivering gas. They offered a new cheap contract, which Europeans as a whole rejected. They chose instead to buy at spot pricing, which is much more expensive, as you're seeing right now. So why should all this infuriate you? What's the difference between $1.80 per gallon and $4 or $5 per gallon for gasoline in the US when it's coming out of your pocket? Imagine having a good job and not being able to afford the gas to get to work because of inflation pressures. Now don't worry, West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin imagined it for you and is trying to put a stop to it. It's a hard enough choice to bear the cost in lives when a war is worth fighting, never mind when one isn't and it can be avoided. Ukraine's Zelensky doesn't want Donbass back into the fold. Just a few weeks ago, Zelensky described the citizens he claims to want back as subhuman. The Ukrainians, as of January 2022, are not good partners or friends to America. They are unworthy of American support. Do we want to give them the opportunity to send American kids to war so their oligarchs and our politicians can steal more? With the revelations coming out about the spying surrounding Donald Trump's White House and the campaign by Democrats, what you're going to find out, and what I exposed from 2015 onward, was Ukrainian involvement at the government level and Ukrainian diaspora funding and involvement in America and Canada and Australia and the UK. They want what they want for Ukraine. Their lobby is bigger than Saudi Arabia's, and they're flush with money. On February 18, 2022, Ukraine reignited the hot war in Donbass. After shelling heavily all day and into the night, they sent their special operations teams into Donetsk and Lugansk. In Donetsk, they tried to blow up one of the army generals. They sent a team over to a chlorine tank at a chemical plant, and they tried to blow that up, but thankfully they were stopped. Had they succeeded, the chlorine gas would have killed thousands of people. In Lugansk, they blew up a gas station. And as Joe Harding wanted in 2014, since 2014, they blew up a gas pipeline. This is a serious war. And their plan, once they start, and it's always been, they published it in 2015, was to invoke the Croatian scenario. The Croatian scenario involves massacring civilians. Everyone that stands against them in the civilian populace that's left will be killed. The governments of Lugansk People's Republic and Donetsk People's Republic ordered a mass evacuation last night, and they're trying to evacuate most of the population to Rostov Oblast in Russia. Part of the Croatian scenario is to kill every journalist, blogger, or person of influence that can expose what they're doing. They've made a list of every journalist within the region and supposedly have their addresses. I'm currently in Lugansk People's Republic. I am an American conservative, and the difference between the people here and the people in Ukraine is very, very stark. Lugansk and Donetsk, the people of Donbass, they act and react like Heartland America. That's what they remind me of, and it feels like home. Before 2014, most of Ukraine was like this. It's just the way it was. They respected people, they respected people's values, they respected people's beliefs. And now here we are. Joe Biden has got his war. What did it take to get Zelensky's Ukraine to finally move on this? Joe Biden just gave them $1 billion US dollars, your tax dollars. Volodymyr Zelensky promptly went to the city of Mariupol on the coast of the Azov Sea and handed it to Rinat Akhmedov, a Ukrainian oligarch. Akhmedov is going to use that money to build a steel mill and make more money. That was $1 billion in aid for the Ukrainian people. This is your money, your tax dollars at work. If Ukraine succeeds, Biden will no doubt set up Ukraine as his nest egg. It'll be Burisma all over again tenfold. Why would Biden do this? If Zelensky is successful, they'll have access to the second largest fracking fields in Europe. They have access to half of it now. I guess that's not enough. What this means is he can bring Hunter Biden back over here and manage to grow the family fortune once more. For conservatives, I'm telling you now, if we don't stop this, what you see in America right now isn't just your present, it's your future, it's forever. When the Ukrainians decide to come across that line in force and they start massacring civilians, Russia will respond with force. So what if NATO gets involved? It's going to be a bloody mess, and this conflict could expand across the world. If NATO gets involved, this actually might hit home. And I don't care if you're in Chicago or New York or Boston, where I'm from. This is a very, very serious thing going on. If you knew the kind of people that Joe Biden was supporting, you'd be horrified. You would not want to stand next to these people, never mind give them money. And the money that we're giving them right now, they're pocketing it. All this is about to have the nationalist battalions in Ukraine is it gives them the opportunity to kill without any repercussions. They did this in 2014. And this can't happen. This is ongoing work, and if you'd like to sponsor it, contact me at this email, write sponsor in the subject line, and we can discuss the details. I'm going to be covering a lot of ground, providing a lot of information to subjects that have been plaguing people, and that's the reason I'm doing this. Most of these things I've really researched pretty far up to date, but we'll put them